This episode is brought to you by the Catalyst Academy, my year-long incubator for women of color who want to grow their thought leadership through public speaking. Are you ready to join us? Go to bit.ly/The Catalyst Academy to apply. Now let's get into the episode. Welcome to Oversharing with Rhonda, a podcast to amplify the voices of trailblazing women. My name is Rhonda Khan, and I believe in the power of authenticity, vulnerability, and storytelling to connect the masses. As a public speaking coach, speech therapist, performer, mom, and chronic oversharer, I'm often empowering others to own their stories. And what I've found is that the most transformative change happens when we share our journeys while being unapologetically ourselves. Hey everybody, it's my first solo episode. It's just me talking to y'all. Hey. While I highlight many amazing guests on the podcast, and my goal is to amplify women, I feel like it's only right for me, a public speaking coach, to teach you how to amplify your own voice. So once a month, in addition to our guest episodes, you'll get to hear me sharing tips, tools, and stories on how you can become an impactful and powerful speaker. Before we get into the nitty of this episode, I want to explore the word public speaking for y'all. Public speaking is any time you are speaking in front of a group of folks, whether it's 2 or 2,000. It doesn't have to be a speech or a presentation. It can be you sharing your findings at a meeting, or you leading a discussion, contributing to a group conversation, or anything like that. So if you don't know, now you know. With that said, today's episode is a conversation that is highly requested: vulnerability and public speaking. Now, vulnerability is a buzzword. You may have heard its use frequently, and you may, like me, be an avid student of Brené Brown and have learned of its importance. As a public speaking coach, I know it to be one of the most powerful tools of connection. I'm constantly telling folks I work with to access and incorporate vulnerability into their talks. Recently, in the Catalyst Academy, which is my public speaking incubator for women of color, we've had conversations about injecting our stories and ourselves more into our messages. But often folks want to know, how do I share? How much is too much? Do I have to share? What do I share? How does it work? So today, I'm going to break it all the way down. We'll get into what it is, what it isn't, and why it's essential to have it when you speak. FYI, this episode was originally an Instagram Live, in case you hear me saying, hey girl, hey girl, in the middle of the conversation. All right, let's get into it. Today's conversation is about vulnerability, and very specifically, vulnerability during public speaking. So quick story time. Last week, I did my live for the first time. I've done a live before. I've done lives with colleagues, and I love to hop on somebody's live and talk. But my own lives, as I spoke about, I like control, even though I'm a public speaking coach. And I really loved doing my live last week. I really loved it because I felt in the zone, people were engaging, and I knew that I was speaking from a very honest, authentic place. So did the live, saved the video, was reposting it, people were resharing. And then that morning, as I was trying to cut and share a clip, I noticed that my blouse that I wore was open at the bottom, and you could only see it very subtly. And I had on undergarments that were my skin tone. And so, it's like, is it a cami? Is it this or that? But I saw it, and I reached out to my online business manager, Stephanie, and I was just like, Stephanie, I think people can see, under my shirt. Can you see? And she was like, no, people won't even notice. Like, it's very subtle. It was like at the bottom where you have all these like icons and situations. So I was like, okay, but I cropped the video that I posted on my feed. It was just a quick post about how women of color, now is the time for us to really use and amplify our voices. But somebody that I've known for very, very long reached out to me. She was thanking me for the video and she was like, this resonates. And she said, I wouldn't be honest with you if I didn't tell you that the last 4 minutes of your video, your shirt is open. I think at that point, it was somebody that I hadn't spoken to in some time, but that also really knows me really well. It just flooded me with like all types of embarrassment and shame. And I was like, and I was like, I kind of noticed, but I didn't know if it was really noticeable. But you saw it, so maybe possibly I should take it down. What should I do? And then I'm reaching out to my online business manager and she's just like, people really notice. Let me show it to my daughter and my husband and see if they notice. They didn't notice. I'm feeling hot because I'm just like, okay, if this person who knows me and hadn't seen me in years, she was like, I wasn't looking for it, but when I'm paying attention, I don't miss anything. So I asked my stylist. I got a stylist, y'all. Check her out, Nana Badu at Badu Basics. And I was just like, Nana, they're saying that my shirt is open during the live. And she was like, what? Girl, let me look. And so she goes and she looks and she was like, I see it. Take it down. And so like shame, embarrassment, all these different feelings. And again, it wasn't like you could really see anything. Like you weren't saying, oh my goodness, you saw what you probably thought was a bra. She really couldn't see much, but she was just like, it's not a big deal, but we can't have you out here represented. She was like, just repost with the captions. For some reason, I kept trying, but it wouldn't work. And I just gave up. But like by then, the video had been up for at least 48 hours. And so whoever saw, whoever didn't. I asked a couple of friends. She was like, oh girl, I thought it was a keyhole shirt. Again, it's just a shirt. But in that moment, I was just like confronted with literally everything I teach. And when I was reaching out to my business manager, shout out to Stephanie, because we just started working together, but she already knows me. I was like, I feel embarrassed or whatever. And she was like, what would you tell your client going through this? Like, what would be your words? And I was like, I would tell them to own the moment, to make it whatever it is and to move forward. And this situation doesn't impact their message. She was like, and that's exactly what you're going to do in your live. So you could blame Stephanie for this story, but it's actually very, very true. And honestly, had I noticed in the moment, those who know me know I would have had fun when I'd be like, ooh, my shirt, and I would have had a ball with it because it was after the fact. And I felt like I didn't have that level of control that I could manipulate how people view me. That's where the feelings came from. And it's so true in my work. That's what I encounter with my clients. They want to control. We want to control every single aspect of how we're perceived and how we're viewed when we speak publicly. And I just got to telling a client this. We don't need your presenter mode when you come and speak. We all have modes that we have to wear, especially for women of color. We hopping in and out of code switching boxes and stuff all day. But like, we don't need this layer of this is who I am and represent and this is who I am normally. We want that same person when you show up and speak. We want that vulnerability. We want that honesty. We want you to be your authentic self. We can tell when you're not because there's a distance between you and your audience. And we want so much more of you. What I want to talk about is how do you own your vulnerability when you speak publicly? How do you infuse it into your talks? How do you infuse it into anytime you show up in front of people? And I would say I have a lot of experience with this, not just as a public speaking coach and speaker, but for those of you who know, I still have it, a one-woman show called Food that I performed on and off for about 3 years. And it's been 5 years since I did it the first time, which is unbelievable. But I also shared a lot of vulnerable things about my life that even my closest people didn't know. It was healing, transformative for me and the audience and all of that. But it was like peak vulnerability meets storytelling, right? It was peak vulnerability to create connection. And we have to be careful about vulnerability because sometimes people can use it in very manipulative ways. A lot of people think that they need to be vulnerable in multiple situations because that's the thing to do. You have to be vulnerable. But how do you really do that? Because there's some things that you don't possibly need to share, or that may not be safe. And there's some things that may be safe, but maybe you are feeling like, I can't say that in this space, or I shouldn't talk this way. So first of all, let me talk about the importance of vulnerability in public speaking is huge because people, first of all, want to know the real you. They want to know who you really, really are. Even if you're talking about the most technical topics. I coach some folks in tech. I coach some folks that I'm just like, what is this about? They still want nuggets of truth from you. They still want to know who this person really is that they're talking to. And what we are really inspired by is not perfection, but imperfection. We want to see ourselves in your story. We want to know that we have that connection with you. So people can read through that facade. They can read through it. Yesterday, I was working with a client. I've been working with her for a while, and she's so lively, full of excitement and joy, and just naturally witty, and you want to be around her. As soon as she started speaking, it was like my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm like, girl, who is this? This is not who we want to see. Come show your truth. Come take off that presenter mode. And I also encourage my clients to inject parts of their story throughout whatever the public speaking situation is, because I know that vulnerability leads to connection. So let's say you have a talk and you're explaining some detailed data, numbers, like 50% of blah, blah, blah. What do those numbers mean to you? What does this concept mean to you? Why are you specifically connected to this? What do we need to know about you that will make us listen to you more and not just, wow, look at those numbers? Because that's often what we care about. It's so true. And I live for a Maya Angelou quote. Give me all of them. But one of her my favorite quotes, people will forget what you say. They will forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. That's where that comes in. So let us see you. We want to see you. We want to see the real you. I want to tell you also what vulnerability is and what it is not, because I think also there's some confusion about that. And vulnerability and oversharing are different, And some of these people who have given the word oversharing a bad rap are just blurting and saying, and it's not exactly the same. It is not sharing things that are traumatic for you that you have not worked through. That is unsafe. And I have teetered the line. Being vulnerable and transparent with you. One of the reasons that my show is on hiatus, as much as I love performing the show, love it, miss it, is that, and the last time I performed it was last year. One of the reasons why I stopped performing the show is because I was in a space that some of the things I was talking about, I was still living in. And I realized that I can't show up fully in this story if I am not healed. It's going to impact me. So I took a pause on that, and it's totally okay. It's okay if you shared some things, you shared a part of a story at one point, and then later you realize, actually, I don't want to share that. That's totally okay as well. Vulnerability is not weakness, and I know people believe that. It is actually courageous to share something, but you do have to be safe. Next, how do you incorporate vulnerability in your talks? How do you incorporate vulnerability? How do you inject it in there? Knowing what vulnerability is, knowing that it's something that is very important and powerful, but that you don't have to do it if it doesn't serve you. The first thing you want to think about is when you are sharing something vulnerable, what is your intention? What is the reason that you are saying what you are saying? And it should always be about the audience and not you. It should always be about how are you going to impact your audience? How are you going to serve them? How is me sharing this nugget of my truth going to support and serve my audience? So that's where you start with. And then you identify the parts of you that can serve that intention. What are the different parts of who I am to support this intention? Like, what do they need to know about me? Do they need to know about my identity? Do they need to know about a particular struggle? Is this opening up helpful to get this audience to, do or feel something? And then make sure that you are sharing things that possibly could be personal, but not private. Good rule of thumb, personal things you probably share in a group of people, that you feel, again, safe. You feel like you work through. You feel like it may be vulnerable, but it's not anything that it would trigger shame or negativity if it was repeated. Private things, you only share with about a handful of people. Okay. So that's a good rule of thumb when you're thinking about that. It could be a personal story that you inject that's of triumph or pain. It could be, something really exciting that happened that you're happy to share. It could also be a kernel of truth, something that you're going through right now. So literally every time I talk, you're going to hear that I'm a Black woman and you're going to hear that I'm a mama. Probably going to hear something about Chicago because I'm a girl, I live in Brooklyn, but I'm a Black girl from the south side of Chicago, and don't you forget it. And those who know, the fact that I clap through every word will tell you everything that you need to know. But I always share that, but especially motherhood, because it's such an integral part of my business journey. And if you know me, you know that I started my business when my baby was 6 months, and it's always been a business and a baby. I've never been an entrepreneur without being a mother. I don't know what it is. I also don't have that story, and everybody has different roads to entrepreneurship, and no road is better or easier, or, every road is paved with whatever challenges. But I didn't have that story of, I left my 6-figure job and now I'm an entrepreneur. I have no money. I didn't have a job. I was stay-at-home mom with my kid because staying at home with him was financially supportive for my family than us hiring childcare for me to work part-time and do all of that. So it's a very unique journey, but I incorporate that because I want you to know that I'm a woman that has multiple priorities. I want you to know that motherhood is so important to me. I want you to know that I'm like many other people during a pandemic, working half days and trying to make it all work because, sometimes I'm coming raggedy and that's what's happening. But I also want you to know that my kid is a big fuel for my business. I need him to see mommy doing things. I need him to know that mommy's creating something. But it could be any kind of kernel of truth. It could be things you care about personally. It could be causes that you care about. The more we know you, the more we want to listen to you and trust what you have to say. Finally, maybe it's something unique about your personality that you want to add. Maybe it's a quirk. I talk also about me having ADHD, which is a huge part of how I live and thrive and do everything. It is infused. And I'm also somebody who was diagnosed late in the game. I'm 38 now. I was diagnosed at 29. And so I spent a lot of my life with a lot of views about myself. And it also, sometimes I'm like, and sometimes I'm like, it really impacts how I learn, how my mental health is. And so that's important to me, but that may not be something you share. What I want you all to remember is that I never want you to share something because you think it's an attention grabbing story, because that's not being intentional. That's not being intentional and thinking about what your audience could do with this information. You never share something just because, this will be great attention, or this will be a funny story, or this will be a fun story. It could be all of those things, but you start first with why does my audience need to know this from me to get whatever they need in this talk? But you do share stuff that is relevant to your journey, or relevant to your audience, or relevant to the content that you are presenting. Okay? I want to know, when was the last time you shared a story of yours publicly? A vulnerable story of triumph or pain. I want to know. Or when was the last time that you infused yourself into your public speaking? It could be a work presentation. It could be a live video. But when was the last time that you did something like this and infused yourself, your story, your vulnerability? Or when was the last time you owned a mistake that you made, or something that possibly embarrassed you, like my whole open shirt last week? That's a whole story for those of you who came later. I talked about how last week in my live, my shirt was open for the last 4 minutes, and I didn't know until after the video was up for 48 hours. But, I owned it, and that's how we do it. So let me know now or later. I would love to hear that. But in the meantime, I want to remind you that I have a new program specifically for women of color who want to grow in their thought leadership through public speaking. That means that you know that your work is leading you to bigger stages. The work you're doing is really powerful, impactful, important, and it's time for you to show up. It's time for you to show up. It's time for you to share your message, share your story. But I have a question. Let's see who. From Abraxas Karima. I wonder who this is. I often try to keep my stories light, and I have found that sometimes people really connect with things I didn't think were important. That's really powerful because we never know what's going to resonate with people. I've had that experience as well. Sometimes we don't see the value in our own stories, right? Not always necessary to keep things light, but you never know what will resonate with people, which is why stories need to be continued to be shared. I love Brene Brown. If you know me, if you work with me, you know I will talk about Brene Brown all day. And she often says that we're hardwired for connection. And I think one of the most powerful tools of connection is story. Sherry is saying, I tend to carry my whole self to any situation I am in. I go live and record vulnerable shares. I think that is what resonates with others. It can look like I am all together, but I still have vulnerability. What is really together, Sherry? Like, let's unpack what together actually means, because a lot of people look put together, or what is that and who says what together is? And Sherry, you're asking, you feel comfortable sharing, but how far do you go? And so I don't know if you joined when I was breaking down all the ways of vulnerability, but I think that what you want to think is like, why am I sharing this? We always want to be intentional. Like, how will this information impact the audience? How will this make them do or feel whatever they need for them, whatever reason you need them to feel this? And also, we don't share things that we have not worked through, right? We want to make sure that we're not unsafe with our vulnerability. So you don't want to share things you haven't worked through. If you haven't worked through them, possibly not to share this, but you also want to think if you work through it and it's just a little bit vulnerable or sensitive, but you feel like you would feel safe with people knowing beyond just the couple people in the room, or you would feel comfortable with it being reshared, then that will work. Every time we speak, we should be intentional. We're not speaking just to get people's attention or get applause or any of that. It is always about serving your audience anytime you speak. And there can be benefits to yourself as well. Like, you can be healed by telling your story. You can feel that connection, that energy exchange. But ultimately, especially if you're intentionally preparing a speech or interacting with folks, you want to think, what do I want my audience to do or feel when I share this?
So there you have it. If you take anything away from this episode, remember this. Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability can be safe. Vulnerability should be intentional. And vulnerability can show up so many ways. Sharing your quirks, what matters to you, personal stories, or even more. If you're wanting to inject some vulnerability into your messages, here are some questions you can ask. What are the kernels of truth that I can share? Are these kernels safe? Have I worked through them? And why does my audience need to know this from me? What will happen when I am able to share this? How will we become more connected? Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review on iTunes, subscribe, follow us on Spotify, and most importantly, share it with someone who needs this. See you next time. Bye.